Your Grace. The words struck Clara Bennett harder than thunder. She stood beneath the vaulted entrance of Ashbourne Hall with rainwater darkening the hem of her plain traveling dress. One gloved hand still wrapped around the small leather bag she had carried through nearly 5 miles of storm. Beside her stood the man she had married 3 weeks earlier, the man she knew as Daniel Reed, a poor farmer with rough hands, a quiet voice, and a cottage roof that leaked whenever the wind turned east. Yet now an elderly butler was bowing to him, not politely, reverently. Behind the butler, 2 footmen lowered their heads. A maid near the staircase dropped her gaze. Even the guards at the open doors stood straighter. Clara looked at Daniel. For one impossible moment, he did not look like the man who had repaired her father's fence in the rain or warmed soup over a small iron stove. He stood differently, taller somehow, still, commanding, as if the great stone house around them recognized him. "What did he call you?" Clara asked. Daniel's face changed. Not with guilt exactly, with resignation. The storm roared beyond the doors, but inside the vast hall the silence felt heavier. "Clara." "No." Her voice remained soft, which made it sharper. "What did he call you?" The butler glanced between them, suddenly aware that he had stepped into something private. Daniel removed his wet coat and handed it to a servant without looking away from her. The gesture was effortless, familiar, practiced. Clara noticed everything at once. The black marble floor, the ancestral portraits, the silver crest above the fireplace. The same crest she had once glimpsed on a ring Daniel quickly hid beneath his glove. "Your Grace," the butler had said. Clara felt cold despite the fire burning 20 feet away. Daniel took one step toward her. She stepped back. That stopped him. "I can explain." "Can you?" Her eyes moved over the hall again. "Because 3 hours ago, I believe my husband was a farmer who could barely afford another horse." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "I am still the man you married." Clara looked at the servants waiting in silence, at the portraits staring down from gilded frames, at the broad staircase rising toward a life she had never been told existed. Then she looked back at him. "Are you?" He had no answer that could repair the moment. Only the truth remained, and he had waited too long to give it. 3 weeks earlier, Clara had known nothing of Ashbourne Hall, nothing of titles, nothing of hidden estates or servants who bowed. She had known only debt. Her father sat at the kitchen table of Bennett Farm with both hands around a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at a notice from the bank, as if refusing to blink might change the numbers. The harvest had failed. 2 payments were overdue. By the end of the month, they could lose everything. Clara read the letter twice. There must be another way. Her father gave a tired smile. There usually is for people with money. That afternoon, Richard Hale arrived in a polished carriage, wearing a fine wool coat and the expression of a man who already considered the farm his. He offered to settle the debt. His price was marriage. Clara refused before he finished speaking. Richard left smiling. Certain desperation would change her mind. It did not. But someone else had heard enough. Daniel Reed stood near the barn gate in a weathered brown coat, mud on his boots, watching Richard's carriage disappear. When Clara turned toward him, he said quietly, "There may be another way." She almost laughed. "Unless you have several $1,000s hidden beneath that coat, I doubt it." Daniel met her eyes. "Marry me." Clara stared at him. He did not smile. "I will make certain your father keeps this farm." She should have walked away. Instead, she asked the question that would change everything. "Who are you, Daniel Reed?" Clara did not answer Daniel at once. The wind moved through the bare branches beyond the barn, carrying the damp smell of turned earth and approaching rain, while somewhere inside the farmhouse her father coughed into the silence of a room that had held too many unpaid bills. Daniel remained where he was near the gate, one hand resting on the weathered wood, his expression calm enough to make the proposal seem almost reasonable. That unsettled her more than if he had sounded desperate. "You cannot simply ask a woman to marry you because her family is in debt," Clara said. "I just did. And you expect me to believe you can save this farm?" Daniel looked toward the fields stretching beyond the house. "I can guarantee the debt will be settled before the deadline." Clara studied him. She had known Daniel Reed for 6 months, or believed she had. He rented a small cottage 2 miles north, worked neighboring fields for wages, repaired fences when extra money was needed, and owned little beyond an old horse, a wooden cart, and several shelves of books that seemed strangely expensive for a laborer. He never complained about poverty, but neither did he explain it. How? She asked. Savings. Enough to cover my father's debt. Enough. Then why are you living in a cottage with a roof that leaks? For the first time, something almost amused touched his eyes. I have become attached to the bucket. Clara refused to smile. Daniel. His expression sobered. I am not asking you to love me. The words landed differently than she expected. I am asking you to consider an arrangement. Your father keeps the farm. Richard Hale loses his leverage. You have a home that no one can threaten to take from you because of a bargain you refuse to make. And what do you get? Daniel was silent for a moment too long. A wife. Clara folded her arms. That is not an answer. It is the answer I can give you. She should have refused. Every instinct warned her that a man with nothing visible to offer should not possess the confidence of someone offering security. Yet Daniel had never once spoken to her with the oily certainty Richard Hale carried like perfume. He had never looked at the Bennett farm as though it were already his. More importantly, when Clara told her father that evening, Daniel did not come inside and pressure him. He waited on the porch while father and daughter argued in low voices near the kitchen stove. You will not marry a stranger for me, her father said. He is not a stranger. Then tell me who he is. Clara looked toward the dark window. Through the glass, she could see Daniel standing beneath the porch lamp, hat in hand, rain beginning to silver his shoulders. That, she admitted, is the problem. Her father followed her gaze. Do you trust him? Clara thought of the winter morning Daniel had repaired their broken gate without being asked. The afternoon he had carried account books from town when her father was too ill to go, the way he always listened completely before answering. I trust what he has done, she said. I do not understand why he does it. The wedding took place 4 days later in the small village church. There were no flowers beyond what Mrs. Bennett's old friend cut from her garden, no musicians, no elaborate breakfast afterward. Clara wore her best cream dress. Daniel wore a dark coat she had never seen before, perfectly fitted across the shoulders and made of cloth finer than anything in his cottage. She noticed. He noticed her noticing. Neither mentioned it. After the vows, Daniel placed a simple gold band on her finger and promised before God to honor her. He spoke the words without hesitation. That night, when they arrived at his cottage, Clara expected awkwardness. Instead, Daniel carried her suitcase inside, showed her the bedroom, and placed his own blankets beside the small sofa near the fire. You do not owe me anything because of this marriage, he said. Clara looked at him carefully. It was the first thing he had said all day that made her trust him more. It was also the first thing that made her wonder how many other truths he was still keeping. In the days after the wedding, Clara discovered that Daniel Reed was remarkably poor at being ordinary. He rose before sunrise like every farmer she had known, fed the horse, carried water, repaired loose boards, and returned with mud on his boots and cold reddening his hands. Yet small things betrayed him. He washed before every meal, even when there was barely enough hot water. He stood whenever Clara entered the room. He folded his napkin with unconscious precision and once corrected the placement of a spoon before realizing what he had done. Clara noticed everything. She said nothing. On their third morning together, she found him at the kitchen table reading a newspaper from London beside a worn book written entirely in French. I did not know farmers needed French before breakfast, she said. Daniel looked up slowly. It makes the coffee seem better. Does it? No. The answer almost made her smile. She took the chair opposite him. Where did you learn it? School. What sort of school teaches a man to speak French, understand legal contracts, and still leave him repairing fences for wages? Daniel folded the newspaper. An inconvenient one. Clara leaned back. You answer questions the way other people close doors. Something flickered across his face. Perhaps I prefer privacy. Privacy is keeping your thoughts to yourself. Mystery is owning a coat finer than the minister's and pretending no one will notice. Daniel glanced toward the dark coat hanging beside the door. You noticed? I have eyes. Their gaze held for a second longer than either expected. Then Daniel returned to his coffee. Clara should have been frustrated, but the strange thing was that his secrecy did not extend to their daily life. When her father needed medicine, Daniel appeared with it before Clara could ask where the money came from. When rain opened another leak above the Bennett kitchen, he spent an entire afternoon replacing damaged shingles. When Clara wanted to visit her father, Daniel never questioned how long she would be gone. He did not treat marriage like ownership. That kindness complicated everything. One evening, Clara returned to the cottage and found Daniel kneeling beside the fireplace, repairing the clasp on her father's old account case. His hands were rough from work, but the movement of his fingers was careful and exact. "You did not have to fix that," she said. "It was broken. That has never stopped most men from ignoring something." Daniel looked up. "Most men have not lived with you." Clara paused. The words were simple, but something warm passed through the room before Daniel seemed to realize he had said them. He returned quickly to the clasp. Later that week, they attended a harvest supper in the village hall. Someone brought out a fiddle, and several couples began dancing. Clara expected Daniel to remain near the wall. Instead, when an elderly neighbor stumbled through the steps, Daniel quietly corrected the rhythm beneath his breath. Clara turned toward him. "You know the dance. Everyone knows it." "Not like that." She held out her hand. "Prove it." Daniel hesitated. Then he took her hand. What followed was not the awkward movement of a laborer who had learned at village gatherings. Daniel guided her across the wooden floor with effortless control, never looking down, never missing a turn. Clara felt the first true unease since their marriage. Around them, lanterns flickered and neighbors laughed, unaware that the poor farmer moved like a man raised beneath chandeliers. When the music ended, Clara did not release his hand immediately. "Daniel," she said quietly, "who taught you to dance like that?" His expression closed. "Someone from another life." Clara looked at the man she had married and understood something she could no longer dismiss. Daniel Reed was not lying about everything. His work was real. His kindness was real. Perhaps even his vows were real. But the life he had shown her was only part of the truth. The morning after the village dance, Clara woke before dawn and found Daniel already outside splitting kindling beside the cottage. Frost silvered the field edges, and his breath turned pale in the cold. From the doorway, he looked exactly like the man everyone believed him to be. Worn boots, rolled sleeves, mud on the hem of his trousers. Yet Clara could no longer separate that image from the man who had guided her across a crowded floor with the ease of someone raised among chandeliers. She carried 2 cups of coffee outside and handed him one. "You avoided my question last night." Daniel took the cup. "I answered it. You said someone from another life taught you to dance." "That is an answer. It is also a wall." Daniel looked toward the fields. "Some walls exist for a reason." Clara studied him. "And some walls only prove there is something behind them." He almost smiled, but the expression never fully formed. Before he could respond, hoofbeats sounded along the road. A polished black carriage stopped beside the Bennett gate, and Richard Hale stepped down wearing a charcoal coat far too fine for the muddy lane. Clara's shoulders tightened. Daniel noticed. Richard removed his gloves slowly. "Mrs. Reed." He let the new name linger with amusement. "I had hoped marriage might improve your judgment, and I had hoped distance might improve yours." Richard's smile thinned. He turned to Daniel. "I understand you have involved yourself in Mr. Bennett's accounts." Daniel set his coffee on the fence post. "I settled the immediate payment. Temporarily." Richard reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "The remaining obligation becomes due next month under the acceleration clause." Clara felt the old fear return. Daniel held out his hand. Richard gave him the paper with visible satisfaction. Daniel read it once. Then again. His face became still. "This clause is not enforceable." Richard laughed. "You are a farmhand." "Farmer," Daniel corrected calmly. "And the agreement ties acceleration to a transfer of ownership that never occurred." Page 3, second paragraph. "The wording contradicts the collection notice you sent last week." Richard stopped smiling. Clara looked at Daniel. He had not merely understood the contract. He had found its weakness within seconds. Richard stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Where did you learn to read documents like that?" Daniel folded the paper neatly. "By reading them." "No." Something shifted in Richard's expression. Recognition. He studied Daniel's face. Then his voice seemed to fall quieter. "Say that again." Daniel did not move. Richard looked suddenly less certain. "I know that voice." Clara felt the air change between the men. Daniel's jaw tightened. Richard stared at him as if searching through an old memory. Then his gaze dropped to Daniel's right hand. A signet ring, usually hidden beneath a work glove, had become visible when he folded the document. Richard went pale. Daniel closed his fingers around it. "Too late." "Interesting," Richard murmured. "Very interesting." He took the contract back without another word and returned to his carriage. Clara watched until it disappeared beyond the hill. Then she turned to Daniel. What did he recognize? Nothing. Do not insult me. Daniel looked at her. Clara. The coat. The French. The dancing. The law. That ring. Her voice remained controlled, but disappointment sharpened every word. You keep asking me to trust the man you show me while hiding the man you are. For the first time since their marriage, Daniel had no clever answer. He looked toward the cottage, then back at her. I will tell you. Clara waited. When a gust of cold wind moved across the field, Daniel's eyes held hers. Soon, she stepped back. That is what people say when the truth is still inconvenient. She walked toward the house, leaving him beside the fence with Richard's recognition hanging over them like a storm not yet visible on the horizon. For the next 2 days, Clara and Daniel moved around each other with the careful politeness of strangers sharing a small house. He still rose before dawn. She still prepared coffee. He still repaired the Bennett fences and carried supplies to her father. Nothing had changed, which made everything feel changed. Clara no longer saw only kindness in his habits. She saw questions. Why did he know how to read contracts? Why did Richard Hale recognize his voice? Why did a poor farmer own a signet ring engraved with a crest? Daniel, meanwhile, knew silence had become more dangerous than truth, yet each time he tried to speak, he found himself measuring how much of his life could be revealed without destroying the fragile trust between them. On the third morning, the weather broke. Rain began before sunrise and strengthened through the afternoon, turning the road into mud and swelling the creek beyond the south fields. By dusk, wind pressed hard against the cottage windows. Clara stood near the stove while Daniel checked the shutters. The bridge road will flood within the hour, he said. Then we stay here. The roof will not hold if the wind turns. Clara looked up at the ceiling where one dark stain had already begun to spread. Daniel made a decision. Pack what you need for one night. She turned toward him. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. That is not a place. It is close enough. Clara almost refused, but thunder rolled over the fields, and another drop fell from the ceiling onto the table. 20 minutes later, they were riding in Daniel's cart beneath heavy rain, wrapped in wool coats as the horse struggled along the rising road. Clara expected him to turn toward the village. Instead, he guided the cart north, past the old mill, beyond the stone marker she had never crossed. The road widened. Trees gave way to high iron fencing. Through the storm, 2 lanterns appeared ahead beside a massive gate. Clara straightened. Daniel. He said nothing. A guard stepped from the gatehouse, lifted his lantern, and froze when he saw Daniel. Then he opened the gate immediately. Clara felt the first cold edge of certainty. The drive curved for nearly half a mile through dark parkland before a vast stone mansion emerged through the rain. Dozens of windows glowed against the night. Clara stared. You said somewhere safe. Daniel kept his eyes forward. It is. Servants were already gathering beneath the covered entrance before the cart stopped. Daniel climbed down first and offered Clara his hand. She hesitated, then took it. The front doors opened. An elderly butler descended the steps with an expression of stunned relief. Your Grace. Clara went still. Daniel closed his eyes for the briefest moment. The title seemed to echo beneath the stone archway. The butler bowed. Behind him, 2 footmen did the same. Clara looked at Daniel, then at the enormous house, then back at the man she had married. Rain ran from the edge of his coat, but everything else about him had changed. Or perhaps nothing had. Perhaps she was only seeing what had always been there. Who are you? She asked. Daniel met her eyes. This time there was nowhere left to hide. Daniel Whitmore, he said quietly. Duke of Ashbourne. Clara did not speak. Her hand slowly slipped from his. He took one instinctive step toward her, but she stepped back. Clara, I can explain. Her gaze moved over the servants, the marble floor, the family crest above the doorway, the wealth stretching silently around them. Then she looked at him with a calmness that hurt more than anger. You had 3 weeks to explain. Daniel had imagined this moment many times. In none of them had the truth sounded so much like betrayal. Clara did not enter Ashbourne Hall as a duchess. She entered as a woman who had just discovered that nearly every assumption she had made about her husband was incomplete. The servants took her wet coat with careful courtesy, but she barely noticed them. Daniel led her into a smaller drawing room away from the entrance hall, where a fire burned beneath a carved stone mantel and rain pressed steadily against the tall windows. For several moments, neither spoke. Daniel stood near the hearth. Clara remained by the door. The distance between them felt larger than the entire house. "How long?" she asked at last. Daniel knew exactly what she meant. "I was born Daniel Whitmore. I became Duke of Ashbourne when my father died 8 years ago." Clara absorbed the words without moving. "And Daniel Reed? A name I used when I left London." "Used for what?" He looked into the fire. "To disappear." Clara almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You disappeared into a cottage 2 miles from my father's farm." "Yes." "You worked for wages." "Yes." "You let people believe you had almost nothing." "Yes." Her eyes hardened. "And you married me under that name." Daniel turned toward her. "The marriage is legal. That is not the question." The words landed cleanly. He fell silent. Clara stepped farther into the room, but not closer to him. "Why?" Daniel drew a slow breath. "Because for years, every introduction began with my title. Every conversation changed when people learned what I owned. I was engaged once to a woman who spoke of devotion until she believed my inheritance was threatened. Then she disappeared before the week was over." Clara's expression shifted slightly, but she did not soften. Daniel continued. "After that, I stopped knowing whether anyone saw me or the position attached to me. I left. I wanted to live where no one bowed." "So you tested people." "At first, perhaps." "Including me?" Daniel hesitated. That hesitation answered too much. Clara looked away. "I see. Clara, when I first met you, I did not intend to marry you. That improves very little." "I know." His voice was quieter now. "I saw how Richard Hale spoke to your father. I saw what he wanted from the debt. I knew I could stop it." Clara turned back. "Then why did you not simply tell me who you were and help him?" Daniel had no immediate answer. The fire cracked softly between them. "Because I wanted to know," he admitted. "Know what? Whether you would choose a man without wealth, without a title, without anything impressive to offer you." Clara stared at him. Daniel saw the hurt before she spoke. "You wanted honesty from me while giving me none." He lowered his gaze. "Yes. You let me stand before a minister and make promises without knowing the life attached to yours." "Yes." "You watched me trust you." His voice nearly failed. "Yes." Clara folded her hands tightly to keep them still. "Then do not tell me this was kindness." Daniel looked up. "It began as protection and became a test." He could not deny it. Rain moved in silver lines down the windows. Clara's anger remained controlled, but that made every word sharper. "I do not care that you are a duke." Daniel blinked. "I care that you decided I had to prove I could love a poor man before I deserved to know the truth about the wealthy one." For the first time since the title had been revealed, Daniel understood the full shape of what he had done. He had hidden his rank because he feared being valued for it. In doing so, he had denied Clara the very thing he claimed to want from her, the freedom to choose with open eyes. Clara spent the night in a guest chamber that was larger than the entire cottage she had shared with Daniel, yet she slept less than she ever had beneath that leaking roof. The bed was soft, the fire was warm, and every object in the room had been chosen for comfort, but none of it felt like hers. By morning, the storm had weakened to a steady rain. Daniel was waiting in the library when she came downstairs. He had changed into a dark coat that fit the house too well, and for the first time Clara could see how completely he belonged there. A silver seal rested beside a stack of correspondence. Several ledgers lay open across the desk. "There is something else you need to know," he said. Clara remained near the doorway. "More?" "Yes." He did not ask her to sit. He had finally understood that comfort offered without truth could feel like control. "Your father's debt was not created by one bad harvest." Clara's expression sharpened. Daniel turned one of the ledgers toward her. "Richard Hale began buying notes from smaller lenders nearly a year ago. He combined them, delayed collection, then waited until the farm was vulnerable enough to force a sale." Clara looked down at the figures. "How do you know this?" "Because I came to the county to investigate him." She looked up slowly. Daniel continued. "Several tenant families on Ashbourne land complained that Hale was acquiring neighboring farms through unusual debt agreements. I wanted proof before involving the courts. That is why I used another name." Clara's voice remained calm. "So meeting me was part of your investigation?" "No. Meeting you was an accident." "Helping my father?" Daniel hesitated. "That became personal." He opened another document. "Hale offered your father refinancing terms that appeared generous, but the valuation of the property had been deliberately reduced. If your father defaulted, Hale could acquire land worth far more than the debt. Clara read the page, anger replacing confusion. My father trusted these figures. He had no reason not to. Daniel's jaw tightened. Hale counted on that. Clara looked at him. And you knew enough to stop it. Not at first. I suspected him. I did not have everything I needed. But you had enough money to settle the immediate payment. Yes. Silence returned. Clara placed both hands on the desk. Then why marriage? Daniel did not hide behind careful language this time. Because Hale had made it clear that he would keep pressing you. If you married me, his proposal lost its power. I told myself I was protecting you. Clara met his eyes. And were you? Partly. What was the other part? Daniel looked away for only a moment. I wanted you in my life. The honesty was quieter than any declaration. Clara did not soften immediately. You could have told me that. I know. You could have told me who you were. I know. You could have let me decide with the truth in front of me. Daniel nodded. I know. There was no defense left in him now, and strangely, that mattered more than an apology shaped to win forgiveness. A knock sounded at the library door. The butler entered carrying a sealed letter. From Mr. Hale's solicitor, Your Grace. Daniel took it, opened it, and read quickly. His expression hardened. He is attempting to transfer the Bennett note today. Clara's stomach tightened. Can he? Not if these records are correct. Daniel gathered the ledgers. I can stop the transfer and expose what he has been doing. Clara looked at the documents, then at him. Then do it. Daniel paused. With your permission, I will use every legal authority attached to my title. Clara's answer came without hesitation. Use your title to stop injustice, Daniel. Do not use it to make choices for me. He held her gaze. I will not. For the first time since entering Ashbourne Hall, Clara believed him. Not because he had become the Duke before her eyes, but because he had finally stopped asking her to trust a mystery. By noon, Ashbourne Hall had become a place of quiet preparation. Daniel sent for the estate solicitor, ordered copies of Hale's agreements brought from the county office, and asked that Clara's father be informed that no payment should be signed or transferred until further notice. Clara watched from the library as the machinery of Daniel's real life moved around him with astonishing efficiency. Servants carried sealed messages. Clerks arrived with account books. The solicitor addressed him with practiced respect. Yet Daniel did not once speak over Clara or present her father's property as something he controlled. Each document concerning Bennett Farm was placed before her first. This is the original valuation, he said, turning one page toward her. And this is the version Hale submitted 6 months later. Clara compared the figures. The second valuation was almost 1/3 lower. He made the farm look less valuable. Yes, that allowed him to argue that the debt represented a greater share of the property than it actually did. The solicitor adjusted his spectacles. There are similar discrepancies involving 3 neighboring farms. Clara's expression hardened. Then my father was not the only one. No, Daniel said, which is why this cannot end with simply paying his debt. By late afternoon, Richard Hale arrived at Ashbourne Hall. His confidence lasted until he entered the library and saw the solicitor, the ledgers, and Daniel standing behind the Duke's desk. Richard stopped near the doorway. So it is true. Daniel's face remained unreadable. You recognized me yesterday. Not immediately. Richard glanced toward Clara. You concealed yourself well. Clara felt Daniel's gaze shift toward her for the briefest moment. There was no pride in the disguise now. Richard approached the table. This is an extraordinary amount of trouble over one struggling farm. Daniel placed the altered valuation beside the original. It is not one farm. Richard's smile thinned. Business arrangements are rarely as simple as they appear. These are, Clara said. Richard looked at her as though surprised she had spoken. She continued. You lowered valuations, collected notes through intermediaries, and waited until families had no practical way to refuse your terms. Mrs. Reed, I doubt you understand the complexities involved. Daniel started to speak, then stopped. Clara noticed. He was letting her answer for herself. I understand my father's land was worth more than you told him. I understand you offered marriage while holding his debt. And I understand those facts much better now that I can see the records. Richard's expression cooled. And what exactly do you intend to do? Daniel answered this time. The transfers will be suspended pending review. Every affected valuation will be examined independently. Any agreement based on false figures will be challenged through the proper court. Using your title to crush a private businessman? Richard asked, using evidence to stop an abuse of contracts. Daniel's voice never rose. Richard looked from him to Clara. You married a farmer and found yourself fortunate. Clara's eyes sharpened. No, I married a man who should have told me the truth. The room went completely still. Daniel did not flinch. Richard had expected the title to unite them against him like a fairy tale. Instead, Clara had named the wound openly, and Daniel accepted it. That honesty seemed to unsettle Richard more than anger would have. The solicitor gathered the papers. Mr. Hale, you will receive formal notice tomorrow. Richard left without another argument. Only after the doors closed did Daniel release a breath. Clara looked at the documents. Will my father keep the farm? If the independent valuation confirms what these records show, yes. And the others may recover what was taken unfairly. She nodded. Daniel reached into the desk and removed another document. There is one more thing. He placed it before her. It was a legal agreement stating that every payment Daniel had made toward Bennett Farm was a gift, not a claim against the property, Clara, or her father. No repayment. No marital condition. No hidden obligation. Clara read it slowly. When did you prepare this? This morning. Why? Daniel met her eyes. Because helping your father should never have given me ownership over your choices. Clara looked down at the paper again. For the first time, Daniel was using all the power of being Duke of Ashbourne to remove power from himself. Clara returned to Bennett Farm 2 days later with the legal papers folded inside her traveling case and more questions in her heart than when she had left. Her father was waiting on the porch, thinner than she remembered from only a few days before, but smiling in a way she had not seen since the debt notices began arriving. The independent review had already confirmed the first irregularities in Hale's valuations, and the transfer of the farm had been suspended. Clara sat with her father beside the kitchen stove and told him everything she could without turning Daniel into either a villain or a hero. He lied to you, her father said when she finished. Yes. And he helped us. Yes. Her father looked toward the window where evening light rested across the fields. Those truths can exist together. Clara had spent days trying to decide which truth should matter more. Perhaps that had been the mistake. Daniel had deceived her. Daniel had also respected every boundary she placed once the truth was known. He had removed every financial claim over the farm. He had exposed Hale without humiliating him publicly. Most importantly, when Clara chose to leave Ashbourne Hall, Daniel did not stop her. No carriage arrived the next morning with demands. No letter asked for forgiveness. No servant appeared carrying gifts. For 3 weeks, Clara heard nothing from him except one formal notice confirming that the Bennett property was legally secure. The silence gave her something Daniel should have given from the beginning. Choice. By early spring, the fields had begun to green. One afternoon, Clara saddled her father's horse and rode north along the familiar road. She did not take the grand drive toward Ashbourne Hall. Instead, she turned toward the small cottage where her marriage had begun. Smoke rose from the chimney. The old cart stood beside the barn. Daniel was repairing a section of fence when she arrived, wearing the same weathered brown coat and work gloves she remembered. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats and went completely still. Clara dismounted. You are difficult to find for a duke. Daniel glanced toward the cottage. I was told the roof still leaks. A national emergency. Something almost like relief crossed his face, but he did not move closer. How is your father? Better. The farm is safe. I am glad. Clara looked at the fence, then at him. Why are you here? Because I wanted to finish what I started. The fence. Among other things. Silence settled between them, gentler than before. Daniel removed his gloves. Clara, I do not expect you to return to Ashbourne Hall. Good. He nodded. And I will not ask you to forgive me because I corrected a wrong I should never have created. Clara studied him carefully. This was the man she had married. Not the coat. Not the title. Not the cottage. The man who could work with his hands, quote legal clauses from memory, sleep beside a leaking roof, and still make foolish choices when fear convinced him they were wise. I came back for the farmer, she said. Daniel's eyes changed. Clara, do not ruin it by becoming eloquent. A quiet laugh escaped him. She continued, I did not fall in love with the Duke. I fell in love with the man who repaired my father's roof without being asked, who gave me the bedroom and took the sofa, who remembered how I took my coffee, and who never once treated kindness as something I owed him for. Daniel looked down briefly. That man was real. I know. He was the only part of me that was never pretending. Clara stepped closer, not because he was waiting for her, but because she had chosen the distance herself. Then perhaps we begin there. Daniel held her gaze. With the truth. Only the truth. Behind them, the fields moved beneath a soft spring wind, and the old cottage stood exactly where it had before. Yet nothing was the same. Clara had once married a poor man to save her father. Now she chose the same man with no debt forcing her hand, no hidden title deciding her future, and no promise except the one they were finally ready to make honestly.